Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Elevate Your Sales Game with Integrity. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. And so, as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. And second, we're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch a couple polls just to see how everyone in the room is doing. So this first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? Give everyone a few moments to think about it and submit a response here. Thank you for participating. Awesome. Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, New York, Virginia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Florida, Washington, Alabama, Chicago. Welcome, everyone. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and share these results. All right, it looks like optimism in the lead. Always happy to see that, but we definitely have some feelings of fear, anxiety, and surviving in the audience. I'm hoping our optimistic conversation will help with that a little bit today. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch the second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? This one helps us understand your current entrepreneurial needs a little better so we can keep providing relevant content to all of you. So I'll give it a few more moments to have everyone think about it. Thank you again for participating. All right, I'm going to end this poll. Share these results. Sales in the lead. Very fitting for our conversation today, but definitely some needs all across the board. So we will keep all of this taken into account. Thank you all for participating. I'm going to stop sharing this poll. And without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Carole Mahoney, founder of Unbound Growth and author of Buyer First, Grow Your Business with Collaborative Selling. Carole, it is so amazing to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I have been excited for this for weeks now, so I'm glad that we're finally here.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right into it. So, as a jumping off point, just to touch on the title a little bit, how would you define integrity?
So integrity, if you actually look up the definition on Google, which I did last night, means honesty, sticking to your values and to your morals. And the thing that's interesting about integrity, or I also call it character, is that we really know what integrity is when the proverbial what hits the fan. When things are tough, when you feel that anxiety over sales, integrity is when no matter what, even when it might even harm you or not benefit you, you do what is right. I write a story in the introduction in Buyer First when I hit rock bottom as an entrepreneur and I was out looking for that four-letter word, job. Mm-hmm. as a result, my sister had actually introduced me to her boss. And I knew that because between the role itself was between me and one other person.
Mhm.
And I was desperate at that point to just pay my bills and get some money in. And I really, this was a job that I thought I could do. And I was, a little nervous because this was my sister's boss. And
Right.
so when he asked me, he's like, I'm having a really hard time deciding between you and another candidate.
Mhm.
Now, that's at the point where my integrity was tested, because that's when I could have sold him on the idea of why he should hire me. And
Mhm.
instead, what I did was asked him a question. And I asked, what is the most important aspect for this role for you? And when he told me what it was, and when I knew that it was the thing that I could probably do it if I had to, but it's really not my thing. And I know that this other person's really good at it. I had to swallow a little bit and say, I think you should hire the other person. As much as I want this job, he's going to be a better fit. And I didn't want to put him or myself or my sister in a position later on where we were going to regret the decision.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing that happens is that when we stick to integrity, when we say no to people that we want to have them buy from us, but it's really not in their best interest, that's integrity. And what happens, though, is that you'll start to see other doors open. For every time I've said no to someone, 3 other doors have opened as a result of that. And in this case, Jack, who is the person that I was interviewing with, said, I am so thankful that you made this decision easier for me. I'm going to find out who else wants your products and your services that you might be able to help them. And I got referrals and introductions that solved my problem of getting some money in the bank. But for me, that's what selling should be about. Because if you think about it, our jobs as entrepreneurs and as salespeople in our companies is that we need to connect problems to solutions. That requires integrity.
I love it. It's such a moving story. And I love the emphasis on, the impact that these conversations and the way you carry yourself into these conversations really has, not just on the way that a potential buyer might interact with what you have to offer, but how they feel about themselves and how they feel about interacting with you as a person ever again. So it's really influential.
And so important too, because if you think about it, selling is an exchange of value, something that passes from one person to the next. It's a collaboration, really. And if you think about your buyers and your potential customers, they're having to go through some type of a change. Change is scary. Change has a lot of fear associated with it. What if it doesn't work out? What if I waste my time and my energy and money and I still have this problem later on? And I think that's why sales, it's so important to have integrity in it, because we have to help people go through some scary things. And if we don't act with integrity, I think that it's why we have the perception of sales today as pushy, slimy, and sleazy, is because not a lot of people have acted with integrity in it.
Right. Absolutely. And so, I think as entrepreneurs, doing purposeful work, I think we all want to have integrity in our selling efforts. But, that definitely requires a certain kind of mindset. So, what can founders do to identify and overcome their own limiting beliefs or negative thought pounders that might be hindering their ability to sell the business effectively? And maybe if you had any examples from your business journey or others you've worked with or witnessed.
So many examples. When I work with my clients, one of the things that we do is the very first thing that we do is we do what I call a sales specific assessment to understand what are your strengths, what are the areas of improvements, what are the mindsets and beliefs that are contributing to that. So it's not just about what you're doing, but what's the root cause of that. And as you hit on, it's the mindsets, it's the beliefs that we have towards something that will influence or even dictate how and if we'll do that. And when you think about being able to assess ourselves, it's really hard to do. I'm a bit of a psychology nerd, and there's this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically states is that the more inexperienced we are in something, the more likely we are to overestimate our skills and our abilities in it, because we just don't know any better. And it's not that we're lying to ourselves. We really believe that we can do these things that we've never done before.
Yeah.
And so it's really difficult sometimes for us to self-assess the mindsets and beliefs that happen, which is why we do that assessment. Now, in lieu of being able to have that type of an evaluation done, one of the other ways that founders and entrepreneurs and small business owners can determine the kinds of things that are getting in their way is to actually observe the behaviors that are happening in their buyers. So if you think about it, mindsets are beliefs, are a collection of beliefs, and it's our mindsets and beliefs that then create a behavior, and then that behavior creates a result and an outcome. And so if you're wondering, are there some things that are getting in the way in my own belief system of how I sell? The easy way to look and see if that's the case is to look at and see how your buyers are behaving towards you. So in my book, we talk about 5 different specific mindsets that impact sales, and all of them can be observed in buyer behavior. So for example, one of the most common ones, and also the easiest one to fix, is what we call a non-supportive buy cycle. What this basically means is that how you buy is how you sell. If you're someone who shops around for the best price, has to do a ton of research, $100 is a lot of money to you, then these belief systems will impact you when you start to sell with your buyers. And because what will happen is when they say, well, that seems a little bit expensive, or I need to think it over, your reaction is going to be, well, yeah, of course you do. I would do the same thing. And so that's how you think about buying is how then you will sell and accept those behaviors from your buyers. And that's just one example of the 5 different mindsets that we talk about. Now, when that happens, buyers will delay their decisions, or they'll ask for a lot of discounts, or they'll need to shop around. And as a result, their problems get worse, and they typically don't solve the problem ever, because that's what normally happens is rather than going with another solution, they end up doing nothing. So it's almost our responsibility to make sure that we have a way of buying things that is based on value, that we limit the criteria to being able to do that. We give ourselves deadlines. By changing our mindsets to it and our behaviors, we are then better able to help our buyers change their buying behaviors as well. It happens in sales all the time. And it's one of the things that even the most experienced sellers don't even realize that they're doing, but we all do it every day because I call it the bad form of empathy with our buyers sometimes.
That's super, super interesting. And so you're touching on a point of like, to understand these gaps in your performance and the performance of your business, it requires a deep understanding of who your buyer is, who your potential buyers are, and how they behave. And so what are some strategies or techniques that founders can use to enhance their active listening skills and ensure that they have a better understanding of buyers' needs and their pain points?
Yeah. So active listening skills, if you look at the surveys and research, is the number one thing that buyers value in sellers and business owners who sell.
Wow.
And the number one thing that gets in the way of active listening is our ability to manage our emotions in the moments and our stress levels. So if you think about times when you've been stressed out or distracted and not in the present moment, you don't actually hear the things that are going on. I can't even tell you how many times my husband's been talking to me while I had my phone in my hand and how upset he gets with me because I didn't hear a word that he said.
Right.
We do this in our own minds as well. Whenever we get into situations where we get an objection that we didn't expect, or someone says, oh, your price is really expensive, it causes this emotional reaction in us. How is this going to impact me? What do I say next? What if I do the wrong thing? And we're so busy listening to the voices in our head, it has drowned out everything that the other person is saying. And people sense that, like even on videos or on phone calls, people know when you're not listening, when you're tuned out, either because you answered their question, which wasn't actually their question, you gave them some other answer, what you were thinking of, or you completely miss cues or clues or things that your buyers are almost begging you to ask or point out, but you just kind of roll over them because you want to get to the part where you want to talk about this next thing you were just thinking about. And the thing is like all of our beliefs and mindsets, we can change them. And so adhering to self-care routines, meditation and yoga is the number one thing that I recommend throughout the book. And the reason I recommend it is because it actually works. There's actually studies that show that 15 minutes of meditation actually changes our brains, and it changes our brains in the part where we make decisions. And so if, for example, you're struggling with making decisions in your own buying purchases, not only will meditation help you to better take into account the information you have available to you and process it, it will also make you calmer. It will help you to manage your emotions throughout the day. we were talking before we came live about how we do yoga every morning, and we can feel by the end of the day when we haven't, because that stress starts to build up in our bodies, and we hold that in physical places in our bodies. So learning to manage your stress, learning to have self-care, eating healthy, exercise and movement, socializing in healthy ways, spending time with loved ones, celebrating wins, infusing some fun and some joy and some playfulness into our lives. These are all ways that we can start to manage our stress and manage our emotions, so that when we get into high stress situations like our sales calls, we can better actively listen because we're in the present moment. Now, those are like some long-term strategies that you can use on a daily basis. But what happens when you're actually in a call, right? You're about to either go onto a big interview, or you're about to talk to the CEO of a major corporation that you have been trying to get in front of forever, and your nerves are up. What do? The first thing is to recognize that it is completely normal to be nervous. I think sometimes when we get into that state of nervousness, we're like, oh my God, I got to calm down. What am I going to do? And then we make ourselves even worse.
Yeah.
What we need to do is just accept that it's normal. It is a physiological reaction. And instead of trying to avoid it or ignore it, lean into it. Use that as energy for your conversation. Be accepting of it, that it is what it is. The other thing you can do is breathing techniques. It doesn't take much to just breathe in, hold it, pause, and breathe out. That sort of box breathing method, where you 4 times, 4 seconds in, hold it for 4 seconds, 4 seconds out, it will actually lower your heart rate so that you can be more calm in the moment. So take pauses in your conversations. There's other things you can do, like physical reminders, so that you can be in the present moment and more actively listen. Like, I usually keep an elastic on my wrist, and I snap it whenever I start to feel myself tuning out, or my thoughts are racing, or my heart is racing, or I get sweaty palms. It brings me back to that physical moment here and now. As well as things like pressing your thumb and forefingers together. Whatever physical reminder you need to bring you back to the present moment. These are little techniques that you can work into your conversations, as well as before we came on this, I was doing vocal warm-ups where, you do raspberry lips and you do ragdoll exercises and you scrunch your body up. Like, these are all things that professional performers do before they go on a stage. And sales is nothing if not a performance. These are all little things you can do to better actively listen. The other thing I do, there's a lot of, this is a big thing. I have a game that I play with my clients called the questions and periods game, which I learned from my first sales coach. And the goal of the game is that you answer every question with another question. So you practice your questioning skills. But the real goal of the game is that you have to answer a question with a question related to that. So it has to be a clarification question or relevant to what you heard, which requires you to be in the moment, because you can't do improv if you're in your head. You have to be right there and then.
Totally. Oh, these are such amazing points. And I think it's really interesting because when entrepreneurs are thinking about like, okay, like how can I better understand who I'm trying to reach and communicate with? I think a lot of times our mind goes to like, oh, I need the data tools, or I need the leads or whatever it is. And what you're talking about is that taking care of yourself and doing these things for yourself actually changes your mindset. And so you don't necessarily need to kind of, you can think outside of the box a little bit in terms of like, how can I achieve this? It like starts with yourself.
It does. I mean, look, you see all of the books behind me. I have tried every sales trick, hack that there is. If like sales processes and methodologies were weight loss programs, then I would be Oprah Winfrey. I've tried them all. and also tried Weight Watchers. But the thing of it is that it wasn't until I started acknowledging and changing my beliefs and my mindset towards sales that what to do and how to do it started to come more natural and feel less slimy and pushy and sleazy. Because when selling is something we do to other people, that's when it feels sleazy. But when it becomes something we do with them as a collaboration, it adds more value to the conversation and it brings value to both sides of the equation.
I think this is so important because I think a lot of entrepreneurs can shy away from sales a little bit because they're afraid of being associated with these negative connotations. So I want to touch on this a little bit. There's a few aspects of how this can manifest. So in one instance, how can founders strike a balance between being assertive in their sales approach in alignment with their strategic goals while still maintaining that customer-centric mindset? And maybe if you can discuss any common pitfalls here and how to avoid them.
Yeah. So it's interesting too, because we think that if we're assertive or persistent in sales, that is a bad thing somehow. And it's really about, it's not an either or, it's really more about the intention behind it. So I often look at it this way is, I ask myself this question, like, for example, when I feel nervous about prospecting and reaching out to people that don't know me and trying to engage or start a conversation is a lot of times when this comes up. And I realized one day that I can't remember how it happened. I think I saw someone had fallen down and like all of these people were like walking around this person, like not even like trying to help them in any way. And I was like, that's not right. And I thought to myself, and I went over and helped the person up, but I thought to myself, well, isn't this how prospecting works as well? That, we all know that there are people out there who need help. Maybe we see them that they've fallen on the sidewalk, their leg is broken and they're bleeding. So you have to ask yourself, are you the kind of person who's going to just walk around because they didn't ask for your help? They don't necessarily want your help. Or are you the kind of person who's going to go over and help that person, even when they protest that they don't need help, because you see that they do? And so I think that's the difference between being assertive and the intention behind that. When we try to go after the things that we want and how they impact us, that comes off as assertive. And when we instead focus on, I'm doing these things so that I can help someone, I'm putting their needs ahead of my own right now, in the sense of I'm risking the fear of rejection, that this person is going to push me away and not want my help. But at the same time, if they do, then now I am here and I'm able to help them. So I think of it more as, what is your intention behind the action or the thing that you're about to do? If it's about the other person and is in their best interest, then being assertive is almost a responsibility.
I love that. And so what you're talking about here, I think requires a level of confidence that can be difficult for entrepreneurs to achieve, especially in those early stages, as they're still kind of trying to figure out what's going on with their business strategically. So what are some strategies or techniques that founders can leverage to build their confidence in the sales process without coming off as egotistical or something of the like in communications?
Yeah. So building our confidence in the sales process, there's a number of ways that you can do that. One of the major belief systems or mindsets that get in the way is what we call a need for approval. And just as it sounds, we're worried about what people are going to think about us. We're worried about, how do they see us in a certain way? And that need for approval will completely demolish your confidence, because you're always seeking validation from someone else, somewhere else, and not necessarily validation in your own self-worth and your own self-value. So to build your confidence, one of the first things that I would have you examine is if you have an outsized need for approval from other people, seeking that validation. Now, this is a normal human condition, right? Like you think about it, when we were infants and whenever we tried to do something new, we always looked to our parents like, did I do it right? And then we got that approval and we knew we had done it right. That doesn't necessarily leave us as we grow into adulthood and as we start to get into sales. But in order to get through that need for approval, we need to build up our own self-worth and our own self-purpose so that we're not seeking the validation from someone else, so that we can increase our confidence. One of the things that I recommend for people is that if you find that you're seeking validation a lot of times, one of the first things I say is get off social media, in terms of don't sit on social media during your breaks and just scroll through, because our natural inclination is, they're so much prettier than me. They're so much smarter than me. They're so much more than this than me. When am I going to get my stuff together? How come I haven't figured this out? I'm never going to figure this out. I'm never going to be this. I don't have their, like, and on it goes.
Totally. So
don't do the doom scroll, whether in the news or on social media, because that's just going to give you a more negative mindset, which is going to rob you of your confidence. Another thing that we can do to increase our confidence in life and in sales is to look at all of the past things that you've done that were really difficult. Whenever you had to do something new and you didn't know what you were doing, and that you eventually figured out and you were eventually able to master and accomplish. When I was writing this book, there were times when my confidence was down here and I was like, there's nobody's going to want to read this. It's a waste of paper. All of the thoughts and things, which I have these little poop emoji dolls everywhere that I attribute to these, and I just throw them across the room to get rid of them. My dog thinks it's a game, unfortunately, so I have to, of course, pretty quickly. But one of the ways that I got over that was writing down and reflecting on when I had done something difficult before that I didn't think I could do. When I got divorced, was a single mom, working 2 full-time jobs, going to school full-time. That was really hard, but I managed a way to get through it. I managed to get through that. And so I can figure this out too.
Mhm.
Then another way to build your self-confidence and your self-worth is to seek validation from the people who really matter. Your family, your friends, your loved ones, and not necessarily the strangers on social media or the buyer who doesn't want to respond to you. That's not where your confidence needs to come from. All of these are things that I coach my clients to do and that I also have to do on a regular basis, because whenever you're doing something new, whenever you're challenging yourself, you're going to find those things where you doubt yourself. So make sure you're seeking the validation from people that are going to support you. I think the last thing I would say as far as building your confidence is to celebrate your wins, no matter how small they are. I don't care if you're celebrating the win, the fact that you got out of bed this morning and took a shower, it's a win.
Totally.
Something to show that that you're making progress, and give yourself those milestones and those rewards and things like that. I did a video of when I got my printed manuscript for the first time, and I thought it was not that big of a deal. And I have a writing community, and they said, no, this is a big deal. This is like 12 years of your life of research and writing. And so we did a whole celebration around it and took my family out for dinner, and we opened it up and we looked at it together, and it was like, okay, I've done this. Now what's next? So those are all great ways to build your confidence.
I love it. And you bring up a really interesting point of like, we do a lot of comparison to those around us, even if we don't know them, and we have a lot of negative thoughts, but we don't really necessarily think about, any evidence or reason behind those thoughts. And then when you go and have yourself acknowledge those moments where you've overcome challenges, or just, had achievements. That's the evidence that kind of, disproves those negative thoughts. And so that's something really important to hold on to.
It is. And I think that's the thing with negative thoughts is we think, I have this thought, we give all of this credit to it, and not recognizing that it's just a thought, it's going to pass, and it's not necessarily real, but our brains hone in on that because that's our survival instinct kicking in, right? Like, oh, something bad might happen, we need to prepare for it.
Right.
One of the things that I learned is it's not enough to say you need to stop thinking that. You need to replace it with something else. Replace it with some type of a positive belief. I kind of equate it to when I quit smoking. Going cold turkey wasn't going to work for me. I needed to replace it with something else. So I started drinking a lot of black coffee. It worked because it got me over the smoking part. Now I have to figure out how to get over drinking black coffee too much. But acknowledge those negative thoughts and recognize that they're temporary, and then replace it with something else. And my favorite word to replace any negative thought with is to end it with yet. I haven't figured this out yet. I don't know how to sell yet. All of it will eventually happen. And that's the whole part of having the resilience and a growth mindset in sales and in business.
Awesome. I love it. Such an important conversation. And so I think a lot of what we're talking about is like entrepreneurs and how they experience these fears of things going wrong. But, as part of the entrepreneurial journey, it's never perfect. Things don't always go as planned. So how might founders maintain a resilient mindset and stay motivated in the face of rejection or challenging situations? And how might they actually potentially embrace rejection as opportunities for growth and learning?
Yeah. So rejection is always an opportunity for you to learn, but only if you're willing to ask for the feedback. One of the guiding principles that I have in this book that applies to this conversation as well is I call it the not about me framework. I actually created these t-shirts for people that has not about me written on it upside down so that the person wearing it can remember that it's not all about them. And
I love it.
It works in so many ways. One is it helps you to keep the focus and your intention on the other person, not about me, not about what I do, not about what I think, not about my products and services, but about their issues, challenges, and problems. But then it also helps you to develop that resiliency and growth mindset, because I have also found that when you embrace a not about me mindset, that you also don't worry about rejection as much because it's not about you. They're not rejecting you. They're not ready for help right now. And so that's the other thing in building grit and resilience is that we kind of make it as a judgment of ourselves when we don't have grit and resilience. And so the less it is about ourselves, the more resilient we become, because it isn't about us. It's not about the rejection and these things. And then the other thing is that word yet is looking always at, I haven't figured this out yet. I think if you look at the definition of what a growth mindset is, it's all about understanding and knowing that my present state is not permanent and everything can change, and embracing that as a way of continuing to grow, continuing to learn. A lot of times I have, business owners and sellers that will come to me and say, well, what do I do when somebody doesn't buy from me? How do I get them to come back? Or how do I get them to, want to engage with me again?
Right.
And one of the ways that you can build that resiliency and that grit and that mindset of that is to then go back and ask them, what direction did you end up going in? And what made you choose that direction? What was missing from our conversation that caused you to go that way? Because that's your ability to learn and grow. And so being able to face that critical feedback from even strangers, again, you have to have a good self-worth and validation to be able to accept that. But again, the more you expose yourself to that, into that feedback and recycling that information to get better, that helps to build your resilience because you're building up your skill sets and small daily habits that you can do small changes over time until finally you realize, oh my gosh, look, I completely transformed for what I was doing a year ago in small daily things.
I love that. And I think that concept of incorporating feedback as part of the learning is so important as we're talking about this selling process being collaborative. And so, that I think really helps to build the trust between you and a potential buyer or whoever you're communicating with. And so I want to just dive into the growth mindset a little bit more. What are some ways that founders can actively cultivate a growth mindset for themselves, and especially like for those who have a team that they're leading? What are some ways they can encourage that kind of mindset among their team members?
So one is, if you have team members and you want them to embrace a growth mindset, then you really need to make sure that you've established the ability for them to mess up and not be victimized for that mess up, to not be villainized for that mess up. So when the more people are comfortable and they feel that psychological safety, that it's okay to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and share that without judgment or repercussions, then that's going to encourage your team to have a growth mindset because, you know what? I might not have figured it out perfectly, but I have figured out enough of it so far. And so, and the other part of it is that not seeking perfection in things because it doesn't exist. It is a terrible and destructive myth. There is no such thing. Even in nature, it doesn't exist.
Totally.
So embrace the imperfection in the fact that you're always going to be reiterating. I had a technical founder that I worked with once who said, release early and release often and let other people help you to perfect it. And so, and what part of that is giving yourself a deadline for something so that you have a deadline of, right, this is when this is done. I would still be writing edits in this book if I didn't have a publishing deadline. But the other thing to do, I think, is when you want your team to have a growth mindset is to institute some type of level of play in the workplace, or even if you're a solopreneur, play. Because if you think about it, when we play at things, we can't be perfect in them because we're playing. And so that curiosity, that sense of playfulness, of improv, if you will, is another way to build a growth mindset in your team and in yourself. My youngest son recently started doing horseback riding lessons. Now, I haven't been on a horse in like 20 years. And I've thought, all right, I'm going to go horseback riding with him. And when I got on the horse, I was immediately reminded of how bad I used to be at it. And I could, there was no way I was going to do a perfect trot and post on my first lesson. And so I just had to embrace the fact that I was going to mess up. It was going to be messy. And at the same time was able to have fun with that. And so finding ways to have fun in the messiness of things is another way that you can help your team to, do some exercises where you do improv together. Improv is a great way to get a team to start being playful with each other and overcome their perfectionism, build their confidence and grit.
I love that. And I think this touches on a point of, not just, we talked about understanding your potential customers, but I think this touches on, having a real understanding of those team members that are supporting you in the business, and what things look like from their perspective. And so I think that requires a level of empathy to really implement sustainably. So can you maybe discuss the role of empathy in your sales efforts and how it can positively influence buyer-seller interactions?
Yeah. So, we talked about the not about me framework, right? Where that, when we make it not about ourselves, then we're able see our intentions are more about the other person. So that's one way, is that constant reminder of it, not making it about ourselves.
Mhm.
And, if you think of the definition of empathy, sympathy is when you can kind of, feel for someone, but empathy is when you can truly understand where they are, which is much more difficult to achieve. And so one of the ways to build up your empathy is to, one, make your intentions to be not about you, make it all about the other person. But then also, part of the reason I say it's not about you is because we all have this tendency to want to talk about ourselves. Like right now in my brain, there are tons of little dopamine photons going off everywhere, because that's what happens in our brains when we talk about ourselves.
Mhm.
And that's also how we develop empathy, is by getting other people to talk about themselves. And the way that we can get other people to talk more about themselves versus us talking about ourselves is to ask open-ended and sequential questions. So
Mhm.
open-ended questions are questions that don't end with a yes, no answer, where someone has to give more information to be able to answer that. And sequential being is that they're threaded. So you might start with one high level question, and then you work and drill down with those clarification or sequential questions.
Mhm.
Now, there was a study that was done at Stanford that showed that when people are asked these open-ended sequential questions, that they started to get different perspectives and ideas on their situations and issues.
Mhm.
What happened is, when the person who was asking the questions, they also developed more empathy for that person, because they could better understand where they were coming from.
Mhm.
So, we talk about active listening in sales as the ability to be able to hear what someone is saying and be in the present moment with them. The other reason that that's so important is because it is also how we ask those open-ended and sequential questions. And so when we get our buyers to start talking about their thoughts, their feelings, and collaborate with us, they're going to place more value on that conversation, because we put value on things that we've had a part in, that we've had a part in creating. And then also it helps the buyer to change their minds about something, and helps us because we understand them better.
Mhm.
So we get the dopamine release in their brains, which, by the way, that place in our brains where that dopamine comes from is also the place where we build relationships and trust. So when we ask those open-ended questions to build the empathy for our buyers, that's how they start to learn to trust us.
Totally. I love it. And I think this is really interesting because, it can be a challenge to kind of, take a moment and put aside your own strategic goals and really think about like whoever you're communicating with and what they need. But creating that space for them, ends up having a long-term benefit, in terms of strengthening the relationship you have with this person, and potentially even strengthening the relationship they have with what you're offering. And so it's kind of like this chain reaction effect.
It is. And it's not that you put aside your goals and what you want to accomplish, but it's not front and foremost. And this is the thing that kind of twists people's head around sometimes, is that, if I'm not focused on my goals, how am I possibly going to achieve them? And that's the thing, is when you're focused on the other person and doing what's right and what's best by them, and being curious and empathetic and active listening and all of that, is that it is what is going to get you to your goals, because your buyer has brought you there, not because you've tried to push them into it.
Right. I love that. And so I want to bring it back to, a conversation for founders who are leading teams. We talked a little bit about, cultivating that growth mindset. But there's also, a level of collaboration that's really important. So what are some ways that founders can, strategically collaborate with team members to maximize sales outcomes?
So a collaboration with your team members, and this is essentially what I call coaching, because coaching is really based on a framework of asking questions to get people to share their thoughts and ideas, and self-actualize what their solutions are. And it is all based on active listening and asking open-ended questions. And so I'm a good coach because I'm a good salesperson, or am I a good salesperson because I'm a good coach? I don't really know. But this is also how you can do this with your teams. And so when you get into team meetings, one of the ways that I would have you examine whether or not you're doing this is to look at how much time am I spending talking during meetings versus the rest of my team. This also applies to your sales conversations. How much time are you spending talking versus the other person? The other thing is to think of the type of language that you're using. Again, this applies in collaborating with your teams and your buyers. Are you talking about the me, the we, the mine, the ours? Or are you talking about you, yours, them? That means. When you are using the me and the we words, it's the we-weeing effect. I call it the we factor. You're we-weeing all over the place. Nobody wants part of that. But when you're using buyer-focused words or other-focused words, that invites them to start sharing their thoughts and opinions again. And we go back to that Stanford study of what happens when people share their thoughts and opinions. The other thing is something that's called the IKEA effect. We all know IKEA, that place where you go, you put your own furniture together. Harvard did a study that showed when people have put things together themselves, they place more value on it. And the way that you can do that in a conversation with your team and in a conversation with your buyers is to ask those collaborative types of questions, which draws out their thoughts and opinions on that. What do you think the best solution is? What do you think that should look like? What makes you think that? What else have we tried? What do you think's worked there? What hasn't worked there? Why do you think that is? These are all examples of questions that you can use with your buyers that you customize, and also with your teams to get their thoughts and opinions to collaborate. The other thing that I would press is you also need to consider someone's communication style when you want to collaborate with them. Both in terms of like if you're familiar with DISC and sort of that profile assessment of people's communication styles, recognizing that our communication styles will probably change based on the situations that we're in. So being able to recognize how does someone prefer to communicate, how do they process information, and adjusting our style accordingly. Again, making it not about us. And then also looking at how do they learn, right? Is someone more extroverted in the way that they learn? Are they like me in my extroversion? The more I talk out loud about something, the more I figure things out. Whereas someone who's more introverted, don't put me on the spot to start talking about what I'm thinking because I need time alone to process what I'm thinking before I'm ready to share it with someone else. So take into account how they process information, how they communicate, and the intention of the questions that you're asking. Are you collaborating just to get people to agree with you? Or are you collaborating with the willingness to actually change your own thinking?
And I think that kind of brings it back to what you were saying before and the importance of asking those questions that aren't just yes or no, but really trying to tease out something more meaningful from their perspective, that's like a learning opportunity, as we discussed. So just to close out this main conversation here, what are some tactics founders can implement now, thinking about what we've talked about, to get more and better responses from potential buyers? And maybe if you could elaborate on some ethical selling practices that can help build trust and credibility while still achieving those important sales targets.
Yeah. So if you're trying to reach out to someone and it's a prospecting message, for example, this is maybe the first time you've reached out to them, 3 principles that are important in your outreach messages to people is 1, to be able to quantify a business impact. The second is to be able to engage them in their emotions. And then the third is to be able to draw a contrast between where they are and where they want to be, or the gap in what they want to have. And so I'll give you an example of what that actually might sound like in a message. So when I reach out to companies who are trying to hire salespeople, for example, something I might say is that, companies are typically losing 50% or more of their customer revenue than they should each year because of the number of failed sales hires that they have. And what most are spending is 75% more time than they should be on hiring to begin with, as well as onboarding. And most people don't even know that this is happening. So there I've just quantified a business impact and tied an emotional tie into it that they don't even realize that this is happening. Then I might say something like, imagine finding hidden sales inefficiencies and uncovering frustrating hiring and customer churn, or learning that you have below industry averages for onboarding and buying experiences. How might that impact your perception in the marketplace? Again, drawing on emotions and quantifying an impact for them. These are just a few of the examples of some of the values that we typically discover when companies like yours bring us on to help improve their sales hiring processes. Resulting benefits are a 50% more customer revenue each year, as well as saving 75% of their time in the hiring process, which is real revenue saving that you can be used for more generating activities. And then if you calculate the positive strategic impact of having happier employees and happier buying experiences, what is the potential for you to be able to then do that? So that's an example of messaging that is tied and has buyer-focused language talking about you and yours. It has a quantifiable business impact with the statistics that we cited, but we use statistics and numbers to justify emotional decisions that we've already made. So quantifying an impact, drawing on their emotions, and then using a contrast between here's what could be happening with you right now that you don't even realize, and here's what you could be achieving if you work with us. So that's one example. Another example of that as well is telling details in your messaging. So we all have probably heard the shorter the better. Not necessarily true, because when you can use specific details in your messaging to tie it to a quantifiable business impact, again, that draws off of emotions and draws a contrast, those are the things that studies show people remember as more credible and is, I think, a 95% more likely to want to engage with that person because they feel it's personalized to them, because it is personalized to them, and it's relevant to the things that they're dealing with in their particular role. The things that don't work are the things that we all see are the standard messaging. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I do blibbity bloppity blibbity blop. Nobody wants to engage with that. In fact, 90% of executives would label that as irrelevant spam. We don't want that.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I think we're at that time to jump into live Q&A. So if you are in the audience and you have a question for Carole, please drop it in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll try and get to as many as possible. So I think there's an interesting question here that kind of touches on the confidence aspect that we discussed. So this person is talking about, how they have a really good understanding. They know their product very well, but they're still anxious about trying to sell. So, and, have those conversations, So how can they maybe begin to overcome that anxiety?
So one of the things that I write about in the book is to treat your prospecting or your outbound messaging as an interview. And in this case, if you have like a professional service or a product that you're developing, a lot of times we think I need to have it perfected and all figured out before I can start reaching out to people. Not true, because remember the IKEA effect that people place value on things that they've had a hand in co-creating. So you can treat your outreach as a interview to get their insights and feedback on something that you're working on. People are very willing to share and tell you what they think, right? Because of that dopamine release. So one of the techniques that I teach in the book to help you get over that hesitancy to reach out to people is to treat your outreach like an interview request. I actually have clients of mine that are doing this now and have done this to grow from 2 customers to 15 customers in 6 months. And it's as simple as reaching out to someone, say, if you've been working in an industry for a long time, you probably have lots of people that you've worked with before. And so reaching out to those people and say, hey, I'm working on something new. And I know based on your experience and your expertise that you have a lot of thoughts on this. Would you be open to sharing for like 15 or 20 minutes some of your thoughts and feedback on what I've been working on and what I've been thinking? 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yeah, I'd love to, talk about what you're working on and, some of the questions that you might have and give you some feedback. And then at the end of the conversation, so, you ask your discovery questions, what are your biggest challenges and what's the impact of that? And what have you tried to do it in the past and what worked and what didn't? And why do you think that is? And, when you solve for this, what are you hoping will happen? These are all good questions to use in an interview to help design and customize your product. Right. And then at the end of that conversation, say, I really appreciate this. Would love to send you like a little thank you note, a card or something like that. Where can I mail that to? And would you like to hear what I come up with as I talk with others like you, what I end up coming up with and keep you in the loop? Most people are like, yeah, I'd love to hear what you end up coming up with and what you hear from other people. Simple. And then you now have a door open to be able to have another conversation with them about what you came up with and have an actual sales conversation in that regard. And again, you can then use whatever you've come up with to actually design and create your product or know how to position it with them if it's already created. Or you can also use that as marketing content for your LinkedIn posts, for blog articles or ebooks or things that you might want to share with people that you might want to be able to sell with that would help them inform them of, these are things that other people are struggling with too. So that's just one way to do that. The other thing is, when you're thinking about, that hesitancy in reaching out to people it's not about you. It's really all about them. And reaching out to people, nothing happens until someone makes the sale, until someone reaches out. And just reaching out and just, hey, I'd love to catch up. Would love to hear what you're up to lately and what's going on in your world. that can just open the door for another further conversation about what you're doing and what you're working on. So I would start it that way.
I love that. It's such an easy, simple framework that entrepreneurs can just kind of carry with them as they're going into these conversations. And, I feel like the more you do it, the more your confidence really does build up. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. We have another question here I think is really interesting. Something we didn't quite touch on, of like pricing and like the value of your offering. So, this person's asking, I'm ready to increase the price or the cost per item, but I'm concerned that customers will their support will linger. So, what advice can you give to this issue of kind of like sticking to what you're worth?
So there's a couple of techniques that I would recommend. So one is, if you're nervous about talking about a price increase with your customers, one of the mindsets that we talk about is the comfort discussing money. Now, our discomfort discussing money probably started at the dinner table when our parents shushed us whenever we asked how much things cost or how much money they made. Like Irish Catholic family, definitely not allowed. And so I had to learn about money and learn about having conversations with money on my own. And so that's one of the things that I encourage all of my business owners and salespeople and coaches to do is to take literacy classes, get comfortable with the aspects of money and how it works, and having conversations with people about money and how much things cost. I'm reminded of the time my sister came over. Now, my sister's like, we share everything, right? We know everything about each other, every personal, intimate detail. And she came over my house, saw that we had a new couch, and she came up to me and she's like, can I ask, if you don't mind me asking, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but how much did you pay for your couch? And I'm like, Heidi, like literally, you know everything about me. This is not a big deal.
Right.
But it's those instances of us being uncomfortable around money and conversations around money that make it even more difficult when we have to talk about price and price increases. And so one of the ways to frame a price increase is to explain why you're doing a price increase. Cost of supplies have gone up. And because the cost of supplies has gone up, I'm going to have to raise my prices by X. And that's it. That's the price. There's no other explanation that's really needed. And if they're not going to want to buy from you because of that, then, you can ask why and say, I'm sorry that you feel that way and that this is out of your budget right now, but I totally understand. And then you move on, because there's going to be somebody else who's going to want to buy it at that particular price. The other part of it is that when you share the price with them, just pause and wait. It feels uncomfortable, I know. And we tend to say, look, the price is this, but blah, 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 blah. And, if you order 10 more of these, then I can probably give you a discount. And so is charging this. So we're really not that much more expensive than them. And we immediately go into justifying why we're setting the price at what it is. Instead, pause and let them react to it. And remember, it's not a judgment of you. It's simply maybe just not the right thing or the right time for them. You can't operate a business without a certain profit margin. You can't give away your expertise and your products for free. We all need to be able to make a living.
Love it. Love it. And that really touches back on, that customer centric mindset that we discussed.
Yep.
So I think this is another interesting question, especially for those entrepreneurs that are kind of more early stage, that are entering a market with more established competitors. So what advice can you give to entrepreneurs trying to gain market share without bashing their competitors in selling communications?
Yes. So rule number one, never bash the competitor. It is just not a good look. And the other reality is that most of our buyers do not know the differences between your features and benefits and their features and benefits. So if you do try to go into bashing their features and benefits, then it's just going to be a reflection on your own features and benefits. Instead, what I would encourage you to do is understand that in the buyer's mind, there's no difference between what you do and what they do. The difference comes in how you sell with them. Study after study and research after research shows that in buyers' minds, they place value in the conversation because that's how the rest of their experience is going to go. As far as they're concerned, this platform and this platform, there's really not that big of a difference between the two.
Mhm.
And there's really not that big of a difference between the pricing. It's kind of all of the same to them. And so making sure that you are asking those types of questions that dig into their, not just their pain points, but their struggles, their challenges, the impact, their belief system around that, their process and when they need to see results by. All of those are the types of things in a sales conversation that's going to bring more value into the conversation than a conversation about features and benefits. Not that you never talk about your features and benefits, but it is all within the context of the information that they have shared with you and the quantifiable business impact for them.
Mhm.
The other thing of that is that the comparison in your features and benefits and their features and benefits is that the person who's going to win at the end of the day in that conversation is the one who is able to tie the business impact, the issue that we're having, with quantifiable information that relates to the capabilities.
Mhm.
For example, in my coaching practice, I have a statement of value that I talk about where when I say, when you work with us, you'll be able to fill the empty seats on your sales team without compromising quality and fit. We have a 2 million plus database of salespeople that have been evaluated for sales, so you can recruit the best fit sellers in a quarter of the time and reduce your attrition rates. These kinds of details that you can tie into your capabilities helps the buyer to connect the dots so that it's not about you comparing to this. It is about you tying your benefits and features, more of your features than your benefits, to the issues that they shared that they have. Now, that was a statement that I had shared with an executive who told me that, we have 20 people to fill in the next 6 months. I have one internal recruiter who has 3 other jobs to do. They can't spend 10 to 12 hours per person in an interview process when we have 20 people to hire. I need them doing these other things. And we've tried hiring before, but the recruiters, it's a 50-50 shot. And then we ended up spending $250,000 in a year trying to fill those seats with recruiters that gave us a 50-50 chance.
Mhm.
Because I had that information, I was then able to tie our features and how it solved those complaints and pain points that they had. That's what will allow you to sell at a higher value, as well as differentiate you from the competition.
Amazing. I love that. And I think that's such great focus and that entrepreneurs can kind of hold on to as they're going into these conversations. I think we have time for one more question. So this one is interesting. As we kind of talked about, like making sure that we're asking those good open-ended questions and in our as we're trying to learn and grow. This person is talking about how they're in a new industry and they're trying to kind of ask the right questions, but they're having some difficulty knowing what the right thing is to ask. So what are some ways to kind of develop a knowledge base to come up with better questions to ask your prospects?
So there's a couple of techniques that I would recommend. One is if you do pre-order the book, which I think there's a link around for that somewhere,
Definitely.
and you let me know that you've pre-ordered it, I have some bonus content coming and one of those pieces of bonus content is my repository list of all of the questions that I like people to ask during sales conversations. They're somewhat generalized, but that's so that you can then customize them to your particular buyer and industry and situation. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing is to just sit down and start writing a list of all of the questions you've ever gotten in a sales conversation. I call it the dirty laundry list. Like, what are all of the things that have caused someone to not buy from you or to go in a different direction or no direction at all, or the challenges and issues and things that have come up during those conversations that they struggle with? And use that list of repository questions to start building out what I call problem profiles. Mm-hmm. These are a group of questions that relate to a particular problem and how they become aware of that problem, how they think about that problem, and then how they try to go about solving that problem. Mm-hmm. So start creating your own list of the ones that you've tried and see what kind of answers that you get from those. The other thing that I like to do is I try to embed myself as much as I can into my buyer's world. So, for example, one of the industries that I have a huge passion for is climate change technology and hardware. Like, if I want to help people sell something, this is something that's going to change the world. And so what I do is I go to their associations, I go to their groups, I go to their meetings, I log into their online forums, and I look at what are the things they're talking about? What are the questions that they're asking? What are the things that they're struggling with and trying to figure out? And then I start forming questions of that in my repository of questions as well. Some other things that you can do as well, oops, alarm going off, is talk with other people in the industries. So, I mentioned forums and associations and going there and finding out what kind of conversations that they're having there, but also going into things like Quora and LinkedIn and other communities that they have and what questions are popping up there. And then what questions can you form to help walk them through that particular path? Again, keeping those questions open-ended as much as possible, because that's going to help you learn even more about them.
Amazing. All right, we are out of time. It's been such a great conversation, but to close out, if you had just one brief, piece of wisdom or something that you carry with you that you wanted to leave the audience with in this conversation, what would that be?
It would be that selling is not something you do to other people. It is something that you do with them. And then when you embrace that mindset and you change your beliefs around that, you will see sales success probably sooner than you think.
Amazing. Carole, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to speak to our community and share these incredible insights on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here today. We are sincerely grateful that you joined us.
Thank you so much for having me. And for any questions that we didn't get to, please find me on LinkedIn. Send me your questions. I'm more than happy to answer those, or just get on a quick call with anyone and help them walk through it.
Amazing. And to our audience, we would love for you to join us for our upcoming webinars, which you can view using the upcoming events link that's posted in the chat. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.